Hello and welcome to the Klassiki podcast. I'm your host, Sam Goff. Klassiki is your window into the world of Eastern European film. Subscribers gain access to our library of classic and contemporary titles, as well as filmmaker interviews, video introductions, program notes, and more. You can sign up for a free trial today at klassiki.online. If you enjoy the show, don't forget to subscribe in your podcast app of choice, and remember you can get in touch with us at podcast@klassiki.online. Thank you. Critic, researcher and friend of the show Alisa Goruleva is back on the pod this week for the latest edition of the Klassiki Kino Club, our watch-along exploration of our film catalogue. As always, I asked Alisa to pick a title from our library that she hadn't seen before to discuss, and her choice this time around was very fitting. An Unusual Exhibition, the 1968 comedy of artistic frustration by the great Georgian filmmaker Eldar Shengelaia, who sadly passed away in August of this year. We took the opportunity to pay tribute to Shengelaia and to highlight his importance to Georgian cinema since the 1960s. We also examined the film's strange blend of tones, its disorienting narrative style, and its treatment of the eternal figure of the downtrodden artist. Hopefully, you'll feel inspired to check out the film and to start exploring our library yourselves. So follow the links in the show description to watch along with us on Klassiki. On the film page, subscribers will find a whole host of bonus materials that we put together as part of our celebration of Shengelaia's 90th birthday a few years ago, including an interview with the great man himself. And remember, send us a message at podcast@klassiki.online to let us know what films you'd like us to cover next on the Kino Club. Alisa, welcome back to the Klassiki podcast and another Kino Club. How are you doing?
Thank you so much. Doing great.
Always a pleasure to have you back, and I'm really excited to have the opportunity to talk about this particular film you've chosen this time, An Unusual Exhibition from 1968 by the great and now sadly late Eldar Shengelaia, the Georgian filmmaker who passed away in August this year. So yeah, I mean, as always, I'll start by asking why you picked this film, and I guess in this instance, whether you're choosing this film to talk about how it was related to the fact that Shengelaia had just passed or not.
Yeah, so like you said, Eldar Shengelaia passed away in August, and as weird as it may sound, but news like this always push me to discover or rediscover the figure behind the films. Because of course I've known Shengelaia well, but for me he was more like a name among other Georgian filmmakers of 60s and 80s, just a part of this Georgian cinematic tradition, and I never really studied closely Shengelaia's work. And I guess the reason why I specifically decided to choose Unusual Exhibition is, well, firstly, you have like a great collection of Shengelaia's films on Klassiki, and I had a lot to choose from. But Unusual Exhibition was his first solo directorial work, because before that he mainly co-directed films. So I thought that maybe that detail will open something interesting for us. And yeah, and after watching Unusual Exhibition, I did feel like it was a treasure, and it does stand apart from his earlier films, and it brings together so many themes, both of modern life and of a more universal order, and it's also wrapped in a very sophisticated comedy. So yeah, I think we're very lucky today to talk about it.
Yeah, I mean, it's obviously it's very sad that he's passed away, but it's great to have this opportunity via the Kino Club, via this podcast to just honor him and Klassiki. He's a filmmaker who we love. 2 years ago, on the occasion of his 90th birthday, we had a big season celebrating him, and I'll include some links in the show description because we have a lot of excellent kind of extra material and interviews with Shengelaia and about Shengelaia on Klassiki, so people can really explore that alongside watching this film and others. Yeah, it's. I mean, we might have to be a bit careful here to make sure to actually talk about the film enough, because there's so much to say just about the figure of Shengelaia himself. But this film is, yeah, I think you're right to say this film is maybe a breakthrough film or an inflection point in his career. But if we do just want to dwell on Shengelaia the man for a moment, what do we think people should bear in mind when they approach a film like Unusual Exhibition, which, like I say, comes out in the late 60s, in the first decade, in the first couple of years, let's say, of Shengelaia's filmmaking career? What are the salient facts about Shengelaia that we should bear in mind?
Yeah, I think we should definitely mention that he comes from a family of filmmakers. Mother
Right.
was his mother was a very famous actress. His father was one of the pioneers of Georgian silent cinema. He started as a scriptwriter, then he carried on as a director, and his father collaborated with many great artists. For example, in his film Guli, he worked with the cinematographer Mikhail Kalatozov, who will soon be the director of The Cranes Are Flying, the important figure of the Thor.
So this is his father, Nicholas
Yes,
Shengelaia. Yeah,
exactly.
very important figure.
His filmography was not very large, unfortunately. He died in 1943 when he was, I think, around 40 years old, and when Eldar was only a kid. But I guess that created a certain context for Eldar and for his brother, Georgi, who was also a filmmaker. And both of them went to the geek to study filmmaking. So yeah, there is from the childhood there was this context of filmmaking, the sense of tradition, and I guess it did inspire Shengela and his brother. But what's also interesting about his path as a director, it feels like it was always a matter of finding the right collaborator.
Hmm.
Because his first years as a director, his style and his tone, and yeah, even his interest shifted a lot. His first two films, for example, they were made together with his group mate from Geek, Alexei Sakharov, and they were two very, very different yet very similar films. The first debut film was called The Legend of the Ice Heart, and it was based on a Kyrgyz folk tale, and it's a very abstract, avant-garde story, a legend story that is brought to modern times, which was really unusual. If you watch some of the later Eldar's work, it seems a bit
Yeah.
weird. Yeah. And then the second film is also it's called A Snowy Fairy Tale, and it's also this winter kind of magical story. So after that, he basically moved back to Georgia, and I feel like that was the moment when he stepped back into his own world, the world that was more authentic to him. And the first film that he made in Georgia was called The White Caravan, and he co-directed with Tamas Milavia. And it was a very famous film. It even got into the Cannes competition, main competition in 1964. But yet it was still a different kind of tone and different kind of story.
Yeah, it's a kind of almost near-realist, that film. It's about shepherds coming down from the highlands to find pasture, and it has a lot of that kind of detail of labor and struggle. It's a very beautiful film, but it's quite rough in a way that kind of disappears from his filmmaking when he actually gets to direct solo. It was quite common practice, right, for Soviet filmmakers who had recently graduated to co-direct, to be kind of paired up. So the first couple of his films, he co-directs, and then by the time we get to Unusual Exhibition, he's able to, and like you say, he's back in Georgia, he's back in Tbilisi. Then he's able to work by himself.
Yes, and after White Caravan, which is a very serious and very tragic and beautiful poetic film, he finds his voice within comedies, and it's something I think that was a very right path in his career and his fate because he found something really true to himself. I feel like with the unusual exhibition.
Yeah, and then he does go on to be known for this kind of personal brand of, we can maybe debate how to describe it. I would say a kind of lyrical, occasionally whimsical, but quite politically attuned
Yes, that
dramedy, comedy, drama. They're not laugh out loud, but they're very piquant and observant, and they always foreground these very kind of charming performances. And that's certainly the case with Unusual Exhibition, the one we're talking about today. Okay, so let's get into An Unusual Exhibition itself. This is a film with a slightly strangely arranged plot. I would say we can maybe get into that, but at heart, it's a film about a sculptor called Aguli, who lives in the second Georgian city, Kutaisi. He goes away to fight in the Second World War and then comes back. He marries a Russian woman. He has 5 children. He has this slightly pompous, overbearing ex-military father who lives with him. And the kind of through line of the film is that Aguli is a frustrated artist. He's a sculptor, and he's been gifted at the start of the film this huge block of white Greek marble, and he has these grand plans of what he's gonna create with it. But over the course of the film, kind of financial and familial pressures and responsibilities continually kind of delay his artistic flourishing, and he's kind of reduced to making busts of locals for their tombstones, for their to decorate their graves. And like I said, there's this through line of his kind of continual artistic frustration and how that's balanced against his love for his family. And yeah, and it kind of plays out in a series of incidental scenes over the course of this sculptor's life. I think that's a fair summation, but like I say, it plays out in this very incidental, elliptical way, so it's quite hard to kind of set it out in strict plot terms. What would you say going in? I mean, what did you know about it going in, first of all, and what would you say first kind of jumped out to you as you were watching it?
well, I knew very little. Basically, I should say that I knew nothing about the structure of the film and about how chaotic and bizarre it can be at times, but I
Mm.
absolutely loved it. And but yeah, but the main plot line is obvious, and it's a film, broadly speaking, about an artist. And well, to depict an artist, you need to put an artist in crisis and to put a giant piece of marble in front of him. And I think that this
Would be
marble
nice to
itself,
have an artist who wasn't in crisis for once, but yeah.
but I think that this marble itself is just such a striking image. I mean, it's white, huge, waiting calmly in this dusty backyard.
Yeah, they
And
have this kind of courtyard around which their house is constructed, and this huge, it's what, like 9 feet tall block of just rectangular block of marble just sat there like this overbearing metaphor the whole time throughout the film.
it's just, just there. It seems so inappropriate there, but yet it's so ancient, and yeah, it's it's almost absurd. But yet it gives you a sense of complexity of an artist. And well, there's like this many themes that go throughout the film. There is this theme about the artist and necessity, like the practical part of life. He has to feed his family, he has to take care about his father and wife. Then there is artist and his time. Uh, when the film starts, the main character, like you said, goes to the World War II. Then there's like this post-war society, and like the presence of war is always there. Even this father figure who used to be, like a militant figure, it's very present. Also, like I said, the artist in crisis, and also like a very important theme is the distinction between the artist and a craftsman. And it does, like, all of these conflicts, they do create a sort of duality in which Aguli has to exist, because it seems that he has, two lives. On one hand, he has his artistic dream, this marble that he longs to sculpt, this masters of ancient Greece that he keeps on talking about, this idea of the portrait of the young boy that he wants to make someday,
Mm.
and his ideals, like his beliefs in beauty and truth. But on the other hand, there is this practical everyday life. He marries, he raises 5 children, I think, and his this whole microcosm of daily routine begins to set a different tone to his life and, well, demands something different from him, something more practical. And it is rather like dramatic and serious topic, but it is a kind of a film that treats this seriousness with a sense of humor.
Yeah.
And maybe this is the point where we should mention the scriptwriter of the film, Rivas Gabriadze.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Go on.
because
This is not an angle that I'm super au fait with. So, what's going on there?
no, I just think it's important to mention because Rivas Gabriadze is a legendary figure in Georgian and Soviet cinema. He worked not only with Eldar Shengelaia, but also with Georgi Danelia on Don't Grieve, Passport, Mimino. So he was a famous figure, and Unusual Exhibition was his first feature film script that was brought to life. He went on, apart from this huge feature films, he went on to write scripts for short films that often gathered in cycles and almanacs. And well, one of them, for example, is made up of 10 short films that each depict the daily routine of road construction workers. There's no continuity between the stories, they're just a series of situations, but they function almost like anecdotes, like stories that sum up paradoxes or reveal some sort of mindset. And I feel that Gabriadze had an extraordinary ability to capture life's struggles and frame them in a light philosophical way. And that's what he brought to the Unusual Exhibition. And
Right.
maybe he brought this, wild structure that we already touched upon a bit.
Yeah. As you were describing there, the different angles on the kind of central theme of artistry, of being an artist. As you were laying out the different angles that they take in this film, I was thinking that there's a version of this story which is very cliched and very dull about, and it's something we've seen 100 times. Every time there's a biopic of an artist, it seems to follow the same pattern about the frustrations of being an artist and the kind of worldly pressures that prevent inspiration from taking hold. And it always seems like there's the conflict between the domestic world and the artistic ambition and blah 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 and so on. And this film somehow manages to contain all of that material, but not feel cliched at all. And I think that's partly, this very elliptical way in which the story is told, and partly this very lyrical sense of humor that it approaches it all with. It's quite a kind of amazing artistic feat in its own way to like avoid the cliches and to maintain this kind of lightness, even as it's quite disorienting. As you're watching it, I was watching it again yesterday and I was thinking, oh, this is so strange. Who tells a story like this? How many kids has he got at this point? Oh, suddenly he's got 2 more kids. Everyone looks the same, but they must all be about 10 years older. It's like, it's very, it's kind of radical in its own kind of quite quiet way.
Yes, I think it is, but I really love this type of, world building inside a film because it does invite you, to wander around and to look at the characters, to look at each episode. And I feel like many of the episodes, they have the quality of reprise, like separate situations. So they're
Yeah.
not necessarily complete in themselves, but each add a shade or a color to a larger painting. And you just look at each of them, wander around. And it also makes me think about, okay, what is the most important episode for me? What was like the episode that I particularly loved about this film? And there are like a few that I feel are most important, but the one I want to bring up right now is I think it's just a great illustration of this dilemma of craftsmen and the artists, and I'm talking about the episode with the widow when she comes to see the portrait of her dead husband, and
Yes,
she
so this is one of these locals who has
yeah,
commissioned Aguli, our hero, to sculpt a kind of large ceremonial bust of her late husband to sit at his tomb. Sorry, just to provide the context there.
yes, and she comes twice because the first time she comes to see the portrait sculpture of her that husband, she refuses to pay for it and to take it because Aguli made this heroic, abstract picture,
Very
um,
handsome, dashing, kind of
very handsome and
classical
very,
Greek
yeah, kind of
model. Yeah,
universal, the
too
perfect human.
complimentary.
Exactly, but also like not really true to life, not
Right.
really detailed. And this widow, she refused to take it because what she valued is the resemblance. And the second time she comes, she sees the portrait that looks more like her husband. And the way she treats this figure, she looks at it, she touches, and the things that are important to her is that the shirt that is on the sculpture looks exactly like the one she made for her husband. So it's not the artistic qualities that matter, but the simple resemblance, something very practical, once again. And this is like a very hilarious episode, I feel like.
It's
I
very
don't know if,
moving though as
yeah,
well.
yeah,
I mean, yeah, it's right. It's really like the whole film ultimately is about how to put this. I guess about the integration of everyday life, family life, into the world of art. Because yeah, like you say, the film could be about the tension between the two of them, but actually, ultimately, it becomes about the value in tending to these local kind of domestic concerns. Because yeah, the whole through line of the film of him having to make all these all these tombstone kind of sculptures for local people, and this being, I don't know, quote unquote, a waste of his talents. There's scene at the, I mean, like I think the title for the film refers to this scene at the end where Aguli and his wife are drunkenly kind of stumbling home from a party, and they accidentally stumble into the cemetery where all of these sculptures he's made are, and he kind of drunkenly kind of stands up and says, "We present to you the exhibition by the great sculptor Aguli Aristavi." And he kind of goes around these sculptures that we've seen him make over the course of the film, and like he's a kind of a tour guide or kind of presenting this great kind of show or exhibition, and he kind of lauds their qualities and so on. But he's walking around a cemetery at the middle of night, and that's the unusual exhibition. And it's in that moment he seems to realize that actually, like, these two things weren't in conflict at all. That actually what he's done has a real value. It's just not in this kind of traditional artistic sense.
yes, exactly. But um, I guess I just wanted to mention that apart from this, daily integration of art into your routine and routine into your art, there is a trace of this deeper, more complex level. And it shows up in another episode that I really like. It's when Aguli decides to leave his family and he visits his friend who is an actor, a dramatic actor, and together they went to a seaside and they're sitting on the seashore, drinking wine, eating cheese. I don't know,
It's
having
not, sorry, let me just interrupt you. It's
a
not the seashore, that's just the river in the middle of Kutaisi.
river, exactly. Yeah, I mean the shore. You're right. Yeah, so they're sitting by the river, drinking wine, eating cheese, whatever, and like it's the absurdity of life. But Aguli suddenly says this phrase, which I'm not sure if I can quote it word by word, but he says something like, I have a feeling that it's not me who is living this life, but someone else is doing it for me.
Mm.
It basically means like, okay, I am not myself. I don't know who I am. And this is a very heavy line to be just dropped out there in the middle of this party. And it does open up this existential dimension, but it's, it gets swollen by this bizarre of the things that happening around. But this link is still there, and I guess the whole film is somehow about this need to understand who you are and what you can do with your art and how you can do it in your
Mm.
time.
Yeah, like you say, it is a film about with it's a film with a very specific kind of historical context. It opens with the context of the Second World War, and like the first half of the film, a lot of it is about kind of wartime hardships suffered by this home front population. And one thing, if we're thinking about that political or historical context, one thing running through the film which I think is particularly interesting is the presence of Russia and this relationship between Georgia and, first the Russian Empire and now the Soviet Union. Arguli's father, Pipinya, who is this constant presence, is very proud of having served, in the cavalry in Russian Imperial Army. It seems he fought in the Russo-Japanese War. They keep making references to that, and his dialogue is kind of half Russian, half Georgian. He's constantly shifting in and out of Russian and Georgian. And then there is the whole love plot line, which is Aguli falling in love with and marrying and having these children with Glasha, who is a white Russian military kind of cadet who is kind of posted in Kutaisi during the war. And there being this, not tension per se, but it's definitely, there's something happening there for Shengelaia, definitely, to do with the lingering presence of this kind of imperial history and the way it's been integrated into Georgian daily life. I don't know what you thought about that, but I found it very striking. Yeah, it could have been played as a more kind of antagonistic thing, but as it is, it's just another part of this kind of lyrical detail that
Yeah, no,
he
exactly. I
weaves into
think
the
you're
film.
right. It's like we already mentioned, a lot of things in this film they could have been a more like openly conflicted, but instead they just add something to this larger image. And like you said, this presence of Russia within this small Georgian world, first of all, obviously, like it is there and it is important for Shengelaia and for Gabriadze, I think. And it's the reality of Soviet Georgia that it cannot be a separate world. There is still this presence of larger context that somehow you have to, to respond to. Another thing that I thought would be interesting to mention is the whole idea of this sculpture that Aguli had a dream of. The sculpture is called Spring, and it should depict a young boy with his hands raised. And he never got to make the sculpture. It's just the idea that he carries with him, that he dreams of. And the way this idea is treated, there is this ironical angle because in the course of the film, Aguli and his friend, the actor, they actually meet, the very similar boy who is sitting on the bench wanting to like jump into the river. And Aguli starts talking about how he wants to depict something like this idea of spring and freedom and youth. And then this boy just steals their hats and jumps into the water. So this beautiful idea becomes a sort of a joke and makes both of them angry.
Mm.
And, you know, as strange as it may sound, but I feel like Shengelaia and Gabriadze seem to sense that, like many other artists of the time, that the thaw this was going to an end, and the sculpture of the spring, which was a symbol of thaw, was no longer wanted. This also this dilemma of an artist in crisis and the artist who doesn't know how to live his life and like the person who doesn't know how to live his life would be a central conflict of the cinema of the 70s. And somehow Unusual Exhibition puts these themes and motives together, but doesn't turn them into manifests.
Yeah, I guess it's something that Shengelaia himself would come back to a number of times. I mean, particularly in maybe his
Oh
most
yeah.
famous film, Blue Mountains, which is from the early 80s. So another historical context altogether, but which is about a frustrated novelist instead of a frustrated sculptor. And that film is much more about, like, it's very literally,
Yeah.
concretely about kind of Soviet bureaucracy and the way that it stifles creativity and so on. But yeah, you can definitely see him here kind of developing an idea that will continue to be sadly relevant for the rest of his career. And I guess with that in mind, this idea of the frustrated artist, obviously something that it's always a self-portrait when you're dealing with these Soviet directors and making films about frustrated artists. Shengelaia himself is becomes this very important figure in Georgian cinema, like, and to this day he remains a huge inspiration and a huge influence. And I mean, obviously, with him having recently passed, that's kind of being brought to light and reconsidered once again. And there is something in the the quality that he captures here, this lyrical, comedic, slightly wistful, slightly melancholy character, which is absolutely recognizable for fans of Soviet Georgian film more broadly. And I think also, without generalizing, kind of carrying on into the now kind of 3 decades of post-Soviet Georgian cinema. So, what would you say is the particular kind of Shengelaia legacy that we can draw out of this film?
Yeah. So I think that on one hand, Eldar Shengelaia who could portray and really feel the struggles of the modern days, and his films often bring up the conflicts of the present day, and he had this remarkable sense for understanding the character of his own time. But at the same time, his films, they often carry a broader, more universal dimension. And I don't know, probably it comes from this national spirit or from his own mindset. But there is this kind of wisdom about life that's rooted in humor and light-hearted philosophy. If we talk about Unusual Exhibition specifically, what I love about this film is that there is still hope in it, the sense of new generation with which the film ends, and a light breaking through. And obviously there is bitterness, but it's a bitterness that is softened by optimism. And that's what's beautiful about his films.
Yeah, that's really well put. One contemporary reference that I have in mind, just because it came up while I was speaking to the filmmaker in question, is the Georgian filmmaker Sandro Kobaridze, who made What Do We See When We Look at the Sky, which you can watch on Klassiki now, and whose new film Dry Leaf has just been premiering at festivals. And I remember talking to him a number of times, actually, like about Shengelaia specifically, and also about What Do We See When We Look at the Sky. And he spoke very kind of beautifully about how for him Unusual Exhibition was this kind of beautiful crystalline object, this kind of perfect film that he didn't feel like he could approach. And then when he came to make What Do We See When We Look at the Sky, which is also set in Kutaisi, in the same place, and when he realized that he was also going to shoot a sequence on the White Bridge, the bridge in the middle of Kutaisi, where there's this scene that you've described with Aguli and his friends and the boys jumping into the water. He said when he realized that he was going to shoot a scene in the same location, he was kind of terrified because he was like, how can I, live up to this film and what it means for kind of Georgian cinema? But it also that it was kind of a beautiful moment of communion for him with this guy who he looked up to so much. So yeah, I think there's a very explicit kind of heritage there in a leading contemporary Georgian filmmaker. I don't know, I find that quite a touching story about the anxiety of influence, and also the ways that these images kind of resonate across different generations, and then kind of recycled and reused and reimagined later on. But yeah, that's an unusual exhibition. That's Eldar Shengelaia, who has sadly recently passed away, but we'll always have these films to revisit and to reconsider. And I think that's probably enough for this edition of the Kino Club. Alisa, thanks so much, as always, for bringing another film to the table and for talking through it with me today.
Thank you so much for inviting me.